As we're looking forward to the kind of conversations we're going to be having, and after lunch we're going to take a practice session with something called living room conversations. How many people around here have even heard of living room conversations? From me, okay. A couple of people have heard of it. It's been created by the conservative man who created the website All Sides. And All Sides is a website I highly recommend where they publish the same story from a conservative standpoint, a moderate sort of center standpoint, and a liberal standpoint. And so you can read the same story from 3 different media who have been voted on through a open sourcing process that's carefully managed. This is a conservative viewpoint, this is a moderate viewpoint, this is a liberal viewpoint. It's really helpful for stretching my thinking. And that man who created that is a conservative, and he partnered with this woman who has been the driving force behind living room conversations, and the two of them help together. Living room conversations are designed to bridge the political polarization that we have in our country right now. I'm going to explain it after lunch, and we're going to practice one after lunch, which I think will be a lot of fun. But the intention for their partnership is that all sides will provide information on a topic prior to a living room conversation. So if you want to have a conversation on gun control, there will be some resources potentially available on their website on gun control from multiple perspectives, so that you can be as informed as possible prior to showing up for the conversation. So check that out. What is challenging about our times is nobody's listening. Nobody's listening, everybody's talking. It's just this, going past each other kind of experience. So we have a lot of poor listening going on, which includes all of these kind of behaviors, which I'm sure you recognize: interrupting each other, listening in order to debate, focusing only on what I care about, not what you care about, not managing my feelings well, so I'm not in self-management mode where I can keep from blurting things out that are inappropriate, not seeing or understanding the other person's feelings about things, ignoring important nonverbal signals. And this has cultural overlays because, for example, my husband's half Japanese, so I kind of have picked up some Japanese cultural information through my family. Is in Japan, it's rude to make eye contact in many situations. In the United States, it's considered a sign of dishonesty if you won't make eye contact. So we make a lot of assumptions and interpretations about nonverbal cues that may be wrong. So having some humility about the nonverbals. Being closed-minded, I'm right, I'm here to convince you, I'm not here to listen. Having bad facial expressions, eye rolling, whatever. And then looking disinterested, reading your email on your phone while the other person's talking. None of which is particularly helpful. Good EQ listeners are good at nonverbals, both their own and observing other people's. There is a helpfulness in sitting forward as long as it's not so forward to look aggressive. Like if you're slouched, it kind of gives a message of, oh, sure. But if you're sitting up straight and leaning a little forward and you're nodding, you're like encouraging the other person to keep on talking, keep on talking. Good listeners are patient. Sometimes people struggle to articulate their thoughts, and giving them the space to struggle a little bit and to finish a sentence is helpful. Encouraging the speaker when they feel like they are, halting or insecure. Listening for both facts and feelings. This is a huge thing for those of us, and I'm one, who are Myers-Briggs thinking style, is we tend to go to logic and we tend to go to debate. And people's feelings, remember the elephant and the rider? Remember? The elephant is our feelings and our intuitions, and it's running the show, especially in moments of upset. So my elephant has to honor and listen to your elephant. My feelings need to listen to your feelings and not just attack. And more here, which you can read for yourself. Listening deeply to understand is basically the point. Listening to build relationship is the point. So pen and pencil in hand, and if you need some paper, let us know. Take some notes about green rocks and red rocks that you observed during this conversation. This is an actual living room conversation that they have excerpted highlights from. Living room conversations have certain ground rules. It's a small group of people, typically 4 to 7, who come together to get to know one another in a meaningful way. There's an assigned topic. Sometimes there's some assigned pre-reading. Generally how this works is there are 2 co-hosts, all right? And these are people who know each other and are friendly with each other, but have opposing views on the topic, all right? So 2 people who know each other with opposing views each bring 2 people, for example, with them who kind of share their perspective. So in that case, you would end up with 6 people, 3 with one perspective, 3 with the other. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Now this conversation, you're only going to see highlights from it, but the way it works, if you do it according to the rules, is that each person speaks in sequence. You can go in a circle or you can go out of order, but there's no crosstalk. This is not a debate. So there are 5 rounds of questions, and you're going to get to practice one of these later, so you'll get to experience this more directly. But before they start any of the rounds, they start by reading out loud these ground rules. So you'll hear them do this. So they'll read the ground rules. Each person will read a different one. Be curious and open to learning. Show respect and suspend judgment. Look for common ground and appreciate differences. Be authentic and welcome that from others. So welcome authenticity. Be purposeful and to the point. Do not get on a soapbox, in other words. And own and guide the conversation. Now, the brilliance of this technique is that each person can speak from their heart and answer to, and they get to choose, there's some questions to answer, and they can choose which ones they want to answer. They can share what they want to share, but nobody gets to contradict them. All right? So it's more like a round robin, like if everybody at the table shared, and then it goes around again, and then it goes around again. Does that make sense? And so the challenge in a living room conversation is not to win the point, it's to listen with your heart. All right? So we're going to see how well they do on this particular topic, and how many green rocks you can observe, and if you observe any red rocks, and then we'll debrief at the end. This conversation takes place in Salt Lake City before the ruling on marriage equality had come out, and the topic is marriage equality. And as you will notice, there are 3 people who are kind of liberal, 3 people who are more conservative, approximately. So it's roughly even. We're going to talk about what did you observe in terms of red rocks. Did anybody see any red rocks in that conversation? What would you say? So the gentleman at the beginning, when he talked about his anger and how it consumes him, or
how his anger, his words were it kills him. And I can't remember if he was relating the anger to seeing homosexual couples or the concept of homosexual marriage. They couldn't get that part, but I remember the words anger.
So there's kind of a question mark of, was that a skillful expression? He was using I language, which is recommended, obviously, in these kind of conversations, like I feel, as opposed to you, blah, blah, pointing fingers. So the part where he's expressing himself is good, but we could question, was it skillful to talk about killing me? Is that what you're getting at?
No, that he felt anger. We talk about red rocks.
Yes, red rocks, that he felt anger.
Yeah, he felt anger.
Yeah.
About the whole, I think it was about homosexuality in general.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So my thought on that, thank you for expressing it, is that a negative emotion is not necessarily a red rock if you're sharing vulnerably. And one of the challenges in these conversations, all of them, everything to do with the Healing the Heart of America series, is about tolerating discomfort. We can't get there if we refuse to be uncomfortable. So it is a question to ask, is this skillful? Is this helpful? Is this a feeling that needs to be heard or shared? He thought it did, because he shared it. You didn't seem to be attacking anybody, which would have been very worrisome to me. Right. But yeah, I think that it made you uncomfortable is fabulous to notice, and then we hold in openness, because we weren't there for everything that happened around that sentence, because they've edited this. We can't really know, was that a green rock or a red rock? Does that sound fair to you? Okay. All right, yes, in the back.
I think I saw one red rock when one of the guys said, and people like you.
Pointing, yeah.
Yeah, and the other one was when sometimes they were talking with a lot of feelings, they started talking so quietly, I couldn't hear what they were saying.
Right.
And
yes. So that's a loss of perspective when you're whispering.
Yeah.
You've lost the point that you're trying to communicate, right? Yeah. So that was not very skillful, and saying you or pointing could be seen as aggressive or accusatory. So you have to be careful with that. Let's do one more at the way back table.
There was one point when the gentleman said, I accept in myself that I sometimes have wrong thoughts, so I'm going to accept that you have wrong thoughts and walk with you. That was a little red rock for me.
It would feel like a red rock. It's like I'm tolerating the fact that you're a sinner, right? That it might have the same energy as that, yes. Again, there's no progress without accepting some discomfort.
I thought there were a couple different times where there was a lot of us-them discussion, and which I think is going to happen anyway, but sometimes the them part of that, there were a lot of assumptions that were put forward that, you know, to me in this kind of conversation, you shouldn't be putting assumptions on someone else. You should be stating your part, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and if it is an assumption and it gets reflected back to you as an assumption, wow, okay, you know, then maybe the next chance you have with the microphone or whatever, you say, I'm sorry, that was an assumption, you know, and that becomes a green rock, right? Because you apologize and you learn. One more over here, and then we're going to switch to some of the green rocks you saw.
There was a comment about where it seems as though the power goes with the money. And that was about them. It seemed like.
So the moment, and we don't have the context because this has been little snippets of the conversation, but the woman who was speaking at that time, who was more liberal in her leanings, was making some comment about power and money. And we don't really know what that comment was or how that would land with the conservatives in the room. Was she saying something that they might perceive as accusatory, kind of like the comment that was raised earlier? Yeah. Okay. You want to go ahead and speak, and I'll repeat.
She said, people with money and power create the message.
People with money and power create the message. Okay. And they distribute it. Okay, thank you. So she was making a statement of her perception of reality as fact. Okay, and that's always a challenge for all of us because we assume our perception of reality is fact and all the rest of y'all are just messed up. And so learning softening language can be helpful. My perception is that the people with the power control the message, you know, something like that. Good. All right, let's talk about some of the green rocks you observed. Did you observe some green rocks going on here? Bank account deposits. Let's talk about them. And just shout them out and I'll repeat it for the microphone. I love your point.
I value the difference.
I value the difference. Okay.
Like just the way they're friendly meetings and
Yes, did you notice people were shaking hands and hugging and sharing food? Sharing food.
The power of stories.
The power of stories. And when people shared their personal stories, that was very moving, right? For those of you who don't know what LDS stands for, that means Latter-day Saints. So the woman who was saying that she's both LDS and likes to date women is both a Mormon and a woman who likes women. And so when she was talking about being torn between two realities, she loves her church and she is who she is, and she's torn between those two realities. And so later in the conversation, the woman who was sitting in the middle of the sofa made the comment about, I really appreciate how vulnerable you've been, which I think was a nice green rock as well. So, you know, valuing, I love your point, appreciate your vulnerability. Right. You've been the most vulnerable out of all of us. Yeah.
one of them said, we can do this.
Yeah.
We can do this. Meaning we can have this conversation, right? We can be with each other and have this conversation, yes?
Awareness of the other person's point of view. The guy said, I usually push people away, but I'm aware of that now. And basically everyone's different now because of his awareness.
So awareness of the other person's point of view, not pushing people away because of difference. I noticed a lot of nonverbals when other people were speaking, head nodding. Like, did anyone seem checked out to you? Was there any checked out nonverbals? I didn't see any checked out nonverbals. I saw a lot of engaged nonverbals. So I would say the nonverbals were good. And at the end when he said it's really hard for conservatives to express themselves around this issue, was that the guy? Yeah, so you observed checked out. I observed cautious and a bit defensive. So I perceived him, this is my interpretation, as listening hard, but being sort of guarded. Yeah. Did other people perceive the guardedness? Yeah.
Well, I think that's what he was speaking to. He said it's very vulnerable to be a conservative on this issue because of the tides of culture.
Hard to be a conservative on this issue because of the tides of culture, right?
The idea of civil discourse is a way of building bridges,
right,
and doing it thoughtfully. So I really appreciate
you don't
that.
have to agree, but you need to have a civil conversation in order to build the bridge.
Right, which is what civic discourse is. Yeah.
Right. Fabulous. So very good point. So the fact that they just had the conversation, I would say the conversation itself is a big green rock. That they showed up and listened to each other is a bunch of green rocks. Okay.
And sought common ground.
And one of the points they made, so sought common ground. Did they seek common ground? They did and they didn't. So I heard two things on that. One of which is there is some common ground, and another one, there is no common ground on this. And so the gentleman who was sort of the more defensive conservative said there is no common ground on this marriage question for him. And so for him, there's a hard line in the sand, no crossing this. Marriage is this. Right? So from his perspective, it was not about finding common ground, but could it be about finding respect and a way to walk together? And the whispery guy who was furthest on the left was talking about walking like Jesus walks. If we are really serious about being Christians, can we walk like Jesus walked with everyone? You know, so I thought that was quite a beautiful comment. All right, let me move on now to spiritual intelligence. You may wonder, why is it taking so long to get to spiritual intelligence? It's taking so long because these are so connected, right? Are you seeing how strongly connected these two are? It's a gradation from one to the other. There's not a clear delineation, right? You must have empathy in order to have compassion. You must have emotional self-awareness in order to have ego higher self-awareness. So these things are all connected. Let's talk about spiritual intelligence specifically. So, love is a bird with two wings. We talked about this earlier. This is my definition of love. Spiritually intelligent people behave with love. This proverb from the East says, love is a bird with two wings. One wing is wisdom, the other wing is compassion. If either wing is broken, the bird cannot fly. That leads to the definition that spiritual intelligence is the ability to behave. To behave is very crucial, with wisdom and compassion while maintaining inner and outer peace, regardless of the situation. We talked about this hierarchy of going from antipathy to apathy to sympathy to empathy to compassion, and compassion being the highest. I have a little video for you to watch now where this guy talks about the difference between empathy and compassion in a way that I think will be very helpful. So his point was, you touch on empathy, but you don't hang out there. So you feel with the person, you feel their sadness, their grief, their suffering, their anger, their whatever it is that they're dealing with, and then move into your strength. Because a person who is currently weak needs your strength. They don't need you to be weak with them. And that was the point he's making. It's kind of like if someone's drowning, they need the life preserver, they don't need you to drown with them. Drowning with them may seem noble and self-sacrificing, but perhaps not wise and helpful. Right? So it's getting to the wisdom place. Yes?
So what has worked for me and what I use in counseling, when I become overwhelmed by someone else's pain and circumstances, and that can happen. You know, you just, I mean, I've actually had the thought when somebody's just told me all the things that are going on with them, and I'm just sitting there going, yeah, that is awful. I don't know what you're going to do about that, you know? I mean, that's what goes through me, and I'm like, I have nothing for you. This is overwhelming. This is big. Is that I know that doesn't help, and I know that me suffering and being confused is not helpful. And so what I can do is I pull back a bit, and for me, I remember that compassion is actually a spaciousness of the heart, that here, not my thinking, but my feeling actually can embrace all of that. And therefore, in that embrace, actually be bigger than that. So that it is all, that there is, love is bigger, that something is bigger, and that my perspective then suddenly also becomes bigger than that. And I become calm and peaceful, that there is an answer for this, and there's a way through, and it's a way to love, and then invariably something comforting or wise will occur, and it'll somehow work out. But it first means I can't be in it with them. I can't be suffering with them. I have to pull back a bit and embrace it. You know, I'm not moving away. I'm embracing the whole thing, but in that moment, I'm bigger than that.
Right, and you're opening a space for grace, or the co-creative self,
That's right.
higher self, whatever language you prefer, to show up, right, and a wiser solution to emerge.
And for their insight, you know, to arise, because who brings the issue, brings the problem, also brings the answer somehow.
Right.
They also have it.
Very nice.
I like what you said about you feel it and then you move on from it. I agree with that, and I think it's important to feel it, acknowledge the person's where they are, and then to step into, because if I'm just feeling it and I'm not acknowledging, and I'm stepping into solution, and I'm not acknowledging, that is very hurtful, and that must be very difficult for you, and then moving on to it. So I just wanted to share that.
That is super important point, and thank you for sharing that. Naming emotions is a wonderful thing to do. As you're practicing your own emotional self-awareness, you get better at naming your emotions. You get better at guessing other people's emotions. But I have found, even when I'm wrong, if I guess, and I say, it seems to me you're really sad. Are you okay today? And the person will say, I'm not sad, I'm this. And then they correct me. In the correction, there's still bonding. You know, I've reached out, they've corrected me, but I've acknowledged, like you said, you have to acknowledge the feeling. The challenge for those of us who have cultivated our empathy is not to get lost in it, which was kind of the point. But we don't want to get so far past it that we forget to have it either. So it's both ends. So thank you. That's a really helpful message. The question that comes along with compassion is often, is it about being a wimp? You know, like if I'm all empathy and compassion, is everybody going to run right over me? Is cruelty and evil going to take over the world? Okay. And there is a phrase in Buddhism that if you think compassion means being nice all the time, that's what they call idiot compassion. I didn't make that up. So we don't want to be idiots with our compassion. We want to be helping the world evolve and helping ourselves evolve and getting to a place where love is more present in the world. So how do we do that in a way that is setting appropriate boundaries? And this is a lovely book. It's called Destructive Emotions, How Can We Overcome Them? It's a conversation with the Dalai Lama written by Daniel Goleman, who is the guy I've been mentioning a lot around emotional intelligence. So Daniel Goleman is a practicing Buddhist himself, I believe, and has had several dialogues with the Dalai Lama, who loves all neuroscience kinds of stuff. So they talk a lot about the science in here. But one of the questions that comes up, and there are other people involved in this conversation, there was a fellow involved in the conversation, a scientist named Paul Ekman, who asked the Dalai Lama about how we see that when you become cruel and you're cruel continually, you basically deaden your empathy circuits and you become habituated to cruelty, right? And so cruelty can become a way of life. And he says, if you see someone like that, I'll read the question. When you are faced with someone who has already established cruelty as their way rather than compassion, and they are about to act cruelly toward you or toward another, what can we do? How can we respond to lead that person away from cruelty? And the Dalai Lama replies, it depends on the context. In any specific situation, there is a question whether you really have the ability to do anything or not. If you think there is a possibility, then the first option to consider is peaceful means, theoretically speaking. You would use reason or try other gentle measures to persuade the person not to engage in the cruel act. Clearly, and this is him still speaking, I'm putting on the Buddhist hat again. There are 4 modes of enlightened activity that are laid out sequentially for the Bodhisattva. And the Bodhisattva is a person on the path to becoming a Buddha. So they are a person who is seeking to fully live their Buddha nature, or you might say Christ consciousness if you prefer that language. So there are 4 modes of enlightened activity that are laid out sequentially for a Bodhisattva. The first option is pacifying, where you try to calm the situation with words, with reason, with comfort, or what have you. If that doesn't work, the second option is a slightly stronger mode, causing expansion or increase by giving the person something. You give them a gift. You give them something that will calm the waters. It could even be giving knowledge, or it could be giving something tangible to rectify the situation, to solve the problem. Where that's not possible, then you go to the third option, which is domination or power. You use your greater power to subdue the person, the country, or whatever it may be. There are some situations where even that won't work, and then the final option is ferocity or wrath. Even violence is a possibility. Among the 46 secondary precepts of a bodhisattva, one of those is a vow to engage in a forceful response in a situation that calls for altruistically motivated force. So with wrathful compassion, there can be violence. Theoretically speaking, violence can be permissible if it's done out of compassion. But in practice, it's very difficult and is done only when, with a harmful person, there is no other way to change their cruel attitude. Because once we commit violence, the situation is very unpredictable. And violence generates more violence. Many unexpected things can happen. It is much safer just to wait and see than under those circumstances maybe try some prayers or curse if nothing can be done. And then maybe just shout some words. And then he laughed. These are the modes for a bodhisattva who is still on the path and has to go by trial and error, not knowing exactly what is appropriate in a situation. Whereas one of the qualities of a Buddha is knowing immediately and unerringly exactly what is appropriate. A Buddha doesn't have to use trial and error. But for the rest of us, we are back on the bodhisattva path. Isn't that a beautiful expression? Very humble expression. It's a commitment to use power and force when absolutely necessary, with tremendous humility that I could be devastatingly wrong. And he has in other times made clear that if you are going to use violence, one of those conditions is you are taking on the karma of every person that you harm. So be ready for that. So a tremendous amount of humility. But I think the Buddhist teaching on fierce compassion is interesting, and it helps to fill out this understanding of what compassion is. It does not mean being a wimp. It does not mean watching passively while other people are being harmed. There comes a place for inserting yourself into the process, for action in the world to intervene against evil or cruelty. Does that make sense? Yes. Good. Let's talk for a moment about wisdom. Won't talk too long about this, but there's a hierarchy for wisdom just like there is for compassion. At the bottom is where we all start. We assume a whole lot of stuff that may have absolutely zero accuracy. We assume that the earth is flat because it kind of looks that way, right? And then at some point we figure out, oh, the earth is actually not flat, it's round, right? So over time, with the scientific method, we can gather data. We can develop some theories. You start with unfounded assumptions, then you move to verifiable facts or data. Then you move into information, which is patterns of facts established over a period of time so that you can develop some basic theories which can be tested. Then you move up to knowledge, which is expertise based on long time using of these theories and developing a broader portfolio so that you have expertise in a particular area. If you think about weather, all the weather stations of the world gather data. It's meaningless without some theories about how that hangs together and what that means. It would take decades of working with that data to get really pretty good at, not perfect, but pretty good at predicting storms and hurricanes. Does that make sense? Right, so by the time you get to the predicting hurricanes, you're at the knowledge level. Right? Wisdom is when you are much more humbly aware of your own biases and limitations. People at the expert level are sometimes a little full of themselves and a little too confident, a little too arrogant. As you get to the wisdom level, you are able to factor in your own fallibility and the fallibility of others. So a wise response to a hurricane might include realizing that if you ask everybody to evacuate, more people may die on the highway than you save from the storm surge. You might remember Hurricane Rita, and after Katrina and then Rita, yeah. So then learning to stay put, like if you're asked to not evacuate, do you have the wisdom to stay put? You know, those are, and it's complex because we made massive mistakes with Hurricane Harvey. You know, things were not predicted that happened, right? So there's a humility to all of this process, but that's the hierarchy for getting to wisdom. There are 21 skills of spiritual intelligence. You'll be glad to know I'm not teaching them all today. For me, it's been a fantastic roadmap for my own growth and development. When I started creating this tool, in a sense, it was a very selfish endeavor. I had found unity, I was taking all these workshops, and I felt a little overwhelmed and lost as to what to study next. And I started thinking about who do I want to be most like. Okay, I would like to be like Jesus. I would like to be like Gandhi. I would like to be more like the Dalai Lama. So what are the skills that they have that maybe I could try to learn? And so in a sense, this was always about me trying to become a better person. And if y'all benefited, hey, great, you know? But in a sense, it was a selfish endeavor because I knew I needed to work on myself and I wanted a roadmap to do it from. And this calling was just on my heart for a long time, and eventually I left my career at Exxon to do this full time and to research this tool and to create the details that you now see, which I'm delighted to share with all of you. There's way too much here for us to attempt to cover in a workshop, but there is richness here to work on for a lifetime. I mean, I've started studying this 18 years ago, and I have a long way left to go. And I do not delude myself that I will finish in this lifetime. But it gives me a great way of kind of considering, what do I need to work on? Where am I losing ground? Sometimes you go through stressful times and you lose some skills. It's time to reclaim them and to think about that. So these are the 21 skills of spiritual intelligence. They're broken into 4 quadrants, just like emotional intelligence is. My way of thinking about it is just like with EQ. You start in the upper left with self-awareness, and you get to the lower right as the outcome quadrant, right? The outcome quadrant on the lower right, is social mastery and spiritual presence. You can't get there without having a certain number of skills in the other 3 quadrants. Make sense? Right. So the skills that we're going to focus on for the rest of today are skills 1 and 7. 1 is awareness of my own worldview, and 7 is awareness of the worldviews of others. We're going to focus on skill 13. If you want to mark these, feel free to. Keeping your higher self in charge. And we're going to talk about being skill 20, being a calm and healing presence in the world. Felt like the most relevant for this point in our history. So how do we do that? How do we demonstrate emotional intelligence? Well, or spiritual intelligence. The most important thing to know about spiritual intelligence is that it's a journey from living in our ego to living in our higher self. Now, the way I use the word ego is a marriage between the way a lot of spiritual teachers use it and psychology. So I don't see the ego as a bad thing. I see it as a necessary thing to function in the world, but it is a limited aspect of ourselves. And it tends to be fearful and hyperventilating and prone to the drama triangle. So it's a necessary part, but it's not the part I want running the show. And here you see a couple of images that I love. This guy who's very self-absorbed combing his one hair that's left on his head. And this woman who's very accusatory, pointing her finger out into the world, blaming others. So self-absorption and blame, a couple of characteristics of the ego. There are a lot of synonyms for this, and I believe in generous use of synonyms. Spiritual intelligence is designed to be faith-friendly, faith-neutral, and atheist-friendly. That is a hard thing to accomplish. Right? So in trying to do all of that, to be faith-friendly, meaning if you have a faith, you can bring that language. To be faith-neutral, in that I'm not trying to prejudge and put one faith above another. And to be science-friendly and atheist-friendly and agnostic-friendly means there has to be synonyms that are non-spiritual or non-religious sounding available for people. Has been quite a challenge. We have glossaries on the Deep Change website for all 5 of the major world religions. And we have a generic glossary, and then we have glossaries in some different foreign languages as well. The intention is be generous with synonyms. And here's a few of the synonyms for ego self. It includes your personality self, your smaller self, your immature, contracted self, or your fear-based self or survival-oriented self. And there's many others you could use. Higher self, the other aspect. I love these photographs. Look at this woman. She just looks so happy, doesn't she? Like worry-free. And she's just smiling this beautiful smile, and she has no teeth left. And she doesn't care that she has no teeth left. She's just smiling. She's just embodying joy. And look at this face. Doesn't he just look like he's seen a lot and lived a lot? And there's like wisdom and compassion in that expression to me. I think that's just beautiful. So that's our higher nature. What synonyms might we use for that? In Jungian psychology, they love to say the authentic self. Many other people besides Jungians use that phrase. You might prefer saying my soul, my spirit, my Christ consciousness or my Christ nature, my Buddha nature, my divine self, my non-dual self, my witnessing self, my love-based self, etc., etc., etc. We could probably fill the walls with synonyms for spiritual terminology. Right? But gracious, generous usage of these terms. We're trying to shift to higher self because we are mostly allergic to other people. We're not just allergic to oak pollen here. We are also allergic to other human beings and their wild opinions about stuff that just make no sense. Right? So how do we deal with other people? That's the challenge. Everybody has a worldview or a view of the world. And that view of the world is shaped by many different things. It's shaped by your culture. If you're raised in the United States, I was raised as an expatriate child, so I actually was raised in multiple cultures and had perspectives on being an American that most Americans wouldn't have had the benefit of. But the culture you are raised in affects you. Your gender, your race or ethnicity, your religion, the political party of your family of origin, your developmental stage. Many of you know I've taught spiral dynamics here before. There's other theories of adult development that I love, Maslow's work, Suzanne Cook-Reuter's work. Where we are in the journey from childhood to maturity affects how we see the world. And so where someone is on their stage of development matters. Your Myers-Briggs type, all your life experiences, whether you're coming from your ego in that moment or whether you're coming from your higher self in that moment, all of those things are affecting how you're seeing the world, the lens through which you're seeing the world. Our brain does something that we benefit from and suffer from, which is it perceives and interprets the world very quickly. And we talked about the long line and the short line yesterday when they were really both the same length. The brain is making assumptions, and that's usually helpful, but oftentimes can be a problem. The assumptions that we make and the way we filter information is our own particular cognitive bias. We are biased to see things certain ways. So if we tend to see things from a liberal perspective, we may tend to filter out conservative perspectives. If we tend to see things from a conservative perspective, we will tend to filter out liberal perspectives, and so on. So working with our worldview, if we don't do it, there's no hope for compassion and wisdom. It's an absolutely essential skill. Why is it so hard? It is so hard because we tie our identity to our opinions. Right? I am my beliefs. is the lie that we tell ourselves. And if you challenge my beliefs, you're attacking me personally, and then we go, and there's a big explosion. So the challenge is to look at our beliefs as something that we have, like I have this water bottle, but the water bottle doesn't have me. I have the water bottle. I can put it down. I can let it go. It is not me. It is something that I have. When we think we're our belief, we have jailed ourselves inside a very small room, and only people who think like us are allowed in the room. And that's what we're trying to get out of. What I remind myself when I am triggered, which can happen a lot with the politics in this country, is to say to myself, this person thinks differently from me, but I'm safe. They are maybe attacking my beliefs, but that's not attacking me, right? The limbic system doesn't think it's safe. I have to tell myself I'm safe. The higher self has to tell the ego, you're actually safe, calm down. So how do I learn what my own beliefs are? Skill 1 and skill 7 are always taught together, because skill 1 is about understanding my own worldviews, and skill 7 is about understanding yours. I don't know my own perspective until I see one that's different from my own. If you've ever traveled overseas and been startled by what is considered rude or polite, it is always a bit jarring, isn't it? It's like, so you go to the United Kingdom, I don't know if this is still true, but it used to be true. When you would ride a bus, people would queue up for the buses. Do you know what queue up means? Like whoever gets there first stands closest to the pole, and then people line up next to it. So when the bus arrives, they very orderly get on in order of the queue, right? Now Americans are like, I'm close, I'm running for the bus, I'll jump right on, cutting off the whole queue, right? And the Brits are going like, ah, oh, I must be an American, right? But we don't know what we don't know. And so there's like hundreds and thousands of those examples, some of which are humorous, but some of which are quite serious. We don't know what the other person has lived as their life experience. We don't know their perspective. And that's really what the living room conversations are trying to help us get to. So the goal with being aware of your own worldview is to be able to effectively describe your belief system, be aware that your worldview is not the only legitimate worldview. If we could get the whole country to number 2, wouldn't things change just overnight? Oh my goodness. Yeah, so 2 would be huge. At level 3, I'm able to see with humor and compassion both the need to have a worldview and the inherent limitations of any worldview. So I need to have one to operate in the world, and I'm always going to be partially wrong. Hard to deal with sometimes, but if you can laugh about it, it helps. Level 4, I'm profoundly humble and non-attached about most of my personal beliefs. And at level 5, I am calm and non-judgmental, courageous and centered, loving and timeless. Most people find me to be a reassuring presence who is not imposing any beliefs. Now this is the Gandhi, Nelson Mandela, Jesus, Buddha level, right? It's intended to be difficult to get there. I'm trying to describe what made these people different, what was beyond emotional intelligence in these skills. So this is not meant to be easy to do, all right? So if you look at this and you go, man, I'd be lucky to get to 2, that's okay. That is really okay. This is meant to be difficult. The second, skill 7, these go together. At level 1, I listen to differing points of view, even when they oppose mine. Again, if we could get the whole country here, wouldn't that be a big yay? Number 2, I seek opportunities to learn about and understand other people's points of view. So this is more active. The first one is more I'm just listening. The second one's more engaging with the world. At level 3, I understand other people's points of view and tune into their feelings during a conflict. This is very humanizing, right? If you tune into someone else's feelings. I want to understand both their thoughts and their feelings. At level 4, I have compassion for the hopes and fears that we all share, regardless of our worldviews, and I can demonstrate to people that I understand their feelings. And then the final sentence here, I have chosen a worldview to operate from among the many options I now understand. You can't freely choose a worldview if you can't pick from options. If you're raised in one belief system and you adhere to that belief system, you have not freely chosen it because you've had nothing to choose from. And so by skill 7, coming to understand other people's perspectives, you may change your point of view, or you may come back to your first point of view, but you will come back as an adult. Does that make sense? And then the final, when I learned a better way of looking things, I revised my own worldview. And at the bottom, other people really feel I understand. The one in the middle, the sentence in the middle, causes people some trouble. Through compassionate understanding, I can put myself inside the worldview of anyone, including murderers and terrorists. This is the saintly level of skill 7. Right? This is, again, not saying you're going to indulge in idiot compassion. You're not going to let people run all over you. It's saying that you can understand what created the terrorist. And if you understand what created the terrorist, you might have a chance at discreating, preventing future terrorists. But if you won't open your heart and mind to understand, there's no wisdom, there's no potential future path to solving the problem at a root cause level. All right. Expanding our hearts to think about other people. One of the best exercises I've come across is the Just Like Me exercise. It's labeled the Empathy and Compassion exercise. So I would, for this one, pick the politician who irritates you the very most. And I'd like you to spend 5 minutes going through this exercise, and everywhere it says name, I want you to insert in your mind, you don't have to do this out loud, insert in your mind the name of the politician, or pick another person if it's not a politician, who most drives you nuts. And I want you to go through this. Just like me, person X is seeking some happiness in his or her life. Breathe. Breathe, and then keep on going, all right? So comment on how you feel having taken this person who you really don't like and held them in consciousness and gone through this exercise. Did anything happen for you? You may have a perception of this person that they're not learning, or they're closed off to learning. Is that it? Okay. So we don't know what any soul's journey is. But that's just an interesting thing to notice. Like, self-awareness is the key to a lot of this. I don't know who you're holding in mind. I don't want to hold an assumption. And I don't know whether that person is or is not trying to learn anything. But it's good to notice that. And if you were right, if the person is in a completely closed off state, that would also be compassion building. Because you may then realize, okay, this person is completely closed off. They're in complete defensive mode or whatever. It gives you some insight into their worldview. So there's kind of an assumption, which is a truism, that everybody is doing what they think is the right thing to do, given their perspective. And you may say, what on earth are you thinking, person X, that you think that's the right thing to do? But there's something they're thinking. So then the question is, can you put yourself in their pain? Can you put themselves somehow into that perspective and gain any insight from that? So there's a benefit here of kind of releasing a little fear, humanizing the person you've perhaps dehumanized to see them more fully. Right. The 9-step process to shift from ego to higher self. If you own my book, it is explained in detail in the book. And then there is the 4-step shortcut, because 9 is a lot to remember. Right? So in a short moment, you can do the 4-step shortcut. Everything we're doing today is supportive of the 9-step process and the 4-step shortcut. Because the 4-step shortcut, if you look at it, is stop, insert a pause, take a deep breath, and pray or shift to your higher self. Observe deeply, observe yourself, what's going on with you, what ego voices are being triggered, what emotions are coming up, and observe the other people in the situation. Try to understand all perspectives as best you can, and then find a loving response. So stop, observe, understand, and love. That's the SOUL shortcut. That's the essence of spiritual intelligence in action. Easy to do, right? No problem. No problem. All right, we're going to move into living room conversations now, and I hope you're going to have a lot of fun with this. The nice thing about the living room conversations format is they provide this wonderful tool. So you can go on their website, they have this document for all of these different topics. There's like dozens of topics. And for some of them, you can click out to allsides.com and get additional information from multiple points of view. So you were in agreement on your basic policy, but these conversations are not about creating a policy. These are about creating relationships and deepening understanding. So it was a good practice. And if you were to run this at home, what you'd want to do is find a friend who has a different perspective on the topic. You each bring a couple of people who are sort of somewhat similar in their mindset, and then the 6 of you could have a conversation in that way. So good. So I think one of the beauties of this exercise is it's designed to help create that. Now, it's not a guarantee that it'll create that, but it is designed to help create connection and a feeling of just like me, this person has hopes and fears. You know, so it's a beautiful just like me exercise. And there was a fellow in the videotape that we saw that said, you know, there's nothing like doing this, like doing the practice of this. You know, you can think about it, you can read about it, but doing this is valuable. For those of you who have been with me during adult development kinds of conversations, we talk about increasing our complexity of thinking, which is one of the SQ skills. And we talk about holding the both and holding two things that seem to be opposites as simultaneously true in service of a higher truth. Can you understand, for example, a white supremacist, deeply understand, while also setting boundaries with someone? So you can see why they're doing it, but you can also say, heck no, this ain't okay. This is actually a great moment for me to plug the next thing in our Healing the Heart of America series, so I'm going to just do that.